So, ready to roll this thing?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Well, welcome. I'm very excited tonight. Robert Bowling is our guest, and we are the Fishers History Chat. And so tonight, this is very Fishers history. This is a perfect thing for Fishers history. Sometimes we have them that kind of stretch the boundaries. Maybe it was an Indiana history, but tonight it couldn't get more Fishers. So Robert is a historian. He's a teacher. We're a police officer, I believe, as
Yep,
well.
retired.
Um, and he's kind of a history nut, and so he is a historical author. And this book is what we're going to talk about tonight: is Wicked Fishers. So, Robert, tell us a little bit about Wicked Fishers and what that's all about.
So Wicked Fishers, there's a category of books called Wicked. The publisher actually owns the name to that, so I didn't really come up with that name on my own. There's Wicked books for Indianapolis and San Francisco, LA, any city that they can find someone to write about. Um, it will be called Wicked in whatever city. But the book actually focuses on some of the more scandalous, salacious um, parts of history. It's not really like that type of boring history book that you'd read in school. It's supposed to really some of the stuff that maybe sometimes the city may not be too fond of or may not want everyone to know. But it also includes like urban legends and ghost stories and all those type of things that kind of make the community unique.
Well, so you've got all kinds of titles in here. You've got An Illegal Prize Fight, The Ghost of James Payne, The Legend of Hetty Hollow, Fall Creek Indian Massacre, Junction 69, The Battle of Mudsock, White Cap Beating, The Mystery of the Eller Bridge Arson, A City Under the Lake, Grave Robbing Trials of 1903, The Great School Controversy, The Mysterious Tritipo, is that how you pronounce that?
Tritipo.
Tritipo bombings, Turkey Shoot Leads to Murder. Oh my goodness. Robbery of the Fishers National Bank, the murder of Constable Frank Carey, and the pharmacist who sold more than drugs. You've got all kinds of more of the salacious underbelly of Fishers in here. So tell us about some of this.
Yeah, well, and I will be honest, when I was first approached to write a book, I didn't think that there was really that much Fisher's history to really write about. And I really got to give a lot of credit to David Highway because he laid a lot of the groundwork and did some. Had already written about some of these stories, and so I took a little bit of what he had already done and went a little bit deeper and tried to link certain things together. So I was actually amazed at just how lawless like Fishers was back then, which is one of the reasons why we have some of these interesting stories taking place because of the railroad when it came through Fishers. The railroads always bring in like the most unsavory type of characters, and a lot of like the bad stuff that really happened wasn't so much residents of Fishers; it was outside people coming in. So like for instance, the Battle of Mudsock, which I feel like we've talked a lot about that, and a lot of people now know about it from multiple,
Well, you wrote, didn't you? Wasn't that the one you wrote about for the Fishers magazine?
Yes, I wrote about the Fishers magazine, and 2 years ago, we are not back in 2019 and 2018 and 2019, we did an historical reenactment at the Ambassador House. We basically recreated the Battle of Mudsock. We had actors, we had a director, and we tried to really bring that event to life. And that is one of the, I will say that's probably one of the biggest events in Fisher's history. You know, because if you think about it, when that incident happened, it was 1881, and the city of Fisher was only 9 years old at the time. We had just been founded in 1872. So 9 years, we had this big, huge incident downtown Fishers between two rival saloons. And it's funny they say the Battle of Mudsock, and you make it sound like it's like a Revolutionary War battle, and really all it is a bar brawl uh, between rival saloons. But what I thought was interesting though is that when I started doing the research, I found newspaper articles as far as England that was reporting on it. And really, Fishers at the time in 1881 may have had 100, maybe 100 residents. I don't mean it was very small.
Yeah.
This wasn't like this taking place in Indianapolis, the capital city of the state. It was a small little town, probably nobody ever heard of. And the fact that I found newspaper articles in England reporting on it, I'm like, there must be
to give an idea, 1881 is what you said it was?
1881.
Because in 1960, I happen to know what the census was in Fishers was 300 people. So it was not very big in 1881. 80 years later, yeah.
And I'm guessing the other reason why it got so much coverage is that just a month before the Battle of Mudsock, everyone's familiar with the famous gunfight at the OK Corral. That took place a month before the Battle of Mudsock. So
wow.
So those type of things were going on. I mean, obviously, we haven't got a movie deal yet, but I'm waiting, right? I'm waiting for them to make a movie.
Get Sam Malone and Cheers, and we'll find another bar. And
there you go. Going, so, but yeah, it was very interesting when I started getting into writing this book. Just a lot of the different things that I came across that really made Fishers really unique. So, yeah.
So what? So some of your favorite stories. What are some of your favorites in there?
So I will say that. So one of my favorites actually was the Eller Bridge arson, and it was when I started writing it. Most people think, "Oh, history is just it's in the past, right? There's nothing we can learn from it." And so the Eller Bridge arson, Eller Bridge was a wooden covered bridge that spanned the White River, connecting Fishers and Carmel. And in the 1950s, the years escape me, but the Eller Bridge burned to the ground, and it was the result of arson, is what it was deemed. And so the sheriff came out. They never found the people who burnt the bridge, and it wasn't it really was a landmark. People would actually travel just to come and see the Eller Bridge. It was just something to behold. You would float on the White River and you could see this bridge. So it was really unique to Fishers.
Well, that's a pretty big span across at that point too.
It was, yes. And it was I can't, like I said, in the book, I have it listed like how much it cost to build and when it was built. But when the bridge was burned down, it really caused a lot of problems for 2 years, because it took 2 years to build a new bridge across the White River, which meant that everyone had to go either up north to 146th or they had to go down to 96th Street. And it just was just crazy. So as I started reading this book, I found the people who burnt the bridge down.
You did?
Yes, but it's not what you think. So these were teenage kids at the time. And it was a Halloween prank gone wrong. They were setting off fireworks. It's a wooden covered bridge. And it didn't take much to ignite the timbers, and things just went up. And so these people are in their 80s, and they still do not want anyone knowing who they are. So in the book, I kept everything in the chapter just from public record, just basically what I could find. But I did put an author's note at the end of the chapter saying that it was a teenage prank gone wrong. It really was not an arson. And the people still want to remain silent because people were so pissed. I told him, like, statute of limitations have passed. He was like, I don't care. we're gonna take it to our grave.
Well, there wasn't. I mean, at the time, wasn't it assumed it was some kind of a feud between Carmel and Fishers, or?
Yeah. So, so another chapter. the great school controversy. There was a big deal about merging school systems because at one time there was talk about merging Carmel and Fisher's schools together, and we would just be one school system. Well, a lot of people didn't like that, so there was rumor that the bridge was burned down to prevent us being able to go across the river to get over to Carmel and vice versa. But really, that's not the case. That it was just a Halloween prank. Fireworks went off. I've talked to a couple other people that have also talked to them, and it's kind of comical. We're like decades and decades later. I'm not I'm not telling anybody what happened. It's just one of those unique things that when you're writing a story, uh, you can act like I feel like I solved a 70-year-old arson. Uh, it's like we figured it out.
You
We
got a
solved it.
confession and everything.
Yeah. So, but obviously they don't want to be identified, and I asked, if I could use their name. They're like, nope, we're good. So I just kept it. The chapter I just kept it as just public record. So
Well, getting across there, I mean, I have I relate to them right now because we have 96th Street closed at Allisonville, so we've got 146th Street closed at Allisonville. So for me, I live on one side, and my office is in Carmel. I live on the other side. I can't get anywhere from there. I have to go down to 465 or wander along Eller Road up to 116th to get anywhere. I get it.
yeah.
So
And like some other favorite stories, this one's kind of funny. It's in a way, it's called the Whitecap Beating. So my book that comes out next month that deals with vigilante groups. There's an entire chapter that talks about Whitecaps. And for those that don't know anything about the Whitecaps, they looks very similar to the Ku Klux Klan, um, but they would disguise themselves wearing white caps. But unlike the KKK in the South, they were not motivated by race. Um, they went after everyone, no matter what your race was, but they went after those that were wife beaters, drunkards, lazy people, people that just didn't pull their weight. And what would happen is if you were targeted by the white caps, you would get a note on your front porch saying either straighten up or get out of town. And if you did not, then they would usually come back and then they would beat you with switches. Very rarely did it result in death. There were some times that some people died, but for the most part, it was a beating. So anyway, in this chapter, residents of Fishers woke up one morning, and they were very nervous because there was an incident of whitecap activity in Fishers, which was unique because the Whitecaps actually operated mostly in southern Indiana. There were some instances where they would come north, but usually not so much. So the fact that they woke up one morning and they noticed that a man had been tied to a tree and he'd been beaten by Whitecaps. And so he told everybody that's exactly what happened. They pulled him out of his bed at night, tied him to a tree, and they beat him. Um, so it was a believable story because he was a wife beater. He was also a drunkard. So he would fall in that class of people that the Whitecaps would go after. Well, that's not really what happened. So as I was doing a little bit more researching, um, in the newspaper about 4 days later, it was actually reported what happened. It was his wife that beat him. So he comes home drunk from the bar, and I guess he was trying to either get into the house. She wouldn't let him in. He falls asleep next to the tree. She goes outside while he's asleep, ties him up, and she beats him with switches. And then, so not to let anyone know in town that his wife is the one that beat him, he concocted this story that it was the Whitecaps that did it. And actually, the Whitecaps never
had never been up here. Yeah. So I was gonna say it could have been brothers and stuff of hers as well.
Yeah, yeah. So, but yeah, it's just so once again, once you keep digging a little deeper into the story, then it all kind of comes to life that he made the story up because obviously he doesn't want people knowing that his own wife turned around and did the same thing to him that he did to her. So, um, Some of the other interesting stories is I would have to say the Legend of Heidi Hollow, or not the Legend of Heidi Hollow, but the Ghost of James Payne. We're getting close to Halloween next month. All the spooky stories that we have. There is a cemetery right off Allisonville Road. You It's not visible from the road. So the only way to get there, and when I tell people, is that on Allisonville, right before 106th Street, there will be a Duke transformer, and there's like a little gravel road. You can pull in there and park, and then you would have to walk straight into the woods, and you'll see a cemetery out there. Most of the people that are buried there um, seem to come from the Eller family because Eller Road is not too far away. And that's what most websites will call it. They will call it the Eller Road Cemetery. However, there actually was a church on the corner of 106th in Allisonville, and it was a Quaker church. So really, everyone that's buried out there were Quakers who belonged to that church. But there is one particular grave, and you can't miss it because it sits all alone by itself, and that is the grave of James Payne, who was a Civil War soldier. And so legend has it, and I don't want to give the story away because I want people to read it for themselves. But legend has it that James Payne was a deserter in the Civil War, and he was buried in that cemetery as a, and he was buried in a way in which it was a disgrace, and to this day, now they say his ghost haunts the cemetery. He's now known as the caretaker. So for his penance for deserting, his ghost haunts over the cemetery and keeps watch. There was actually a TV show that came to Fishers in 2012. It was one of these paranormal TV shows.
Right.
And they came and they camped out in the cemetery and tried to see if they could recreate, I guess, the sightings. And according to them, they determined that it was true. But once again, this is the supernatural, so it's all into the eye of the beholder, whether or not you believe it or not.
Well, it's a pretty little place up there. I was up there in the spring because you told me where it was, and it was full of daffodils. It's absolutely gorgeous up there where they
Yeah.
in the spring anyway. So yeah.
Yeah, it's just interesting that it's completely hidden. I mean, these other cemeteries that are taken care of by the township, this one is just it's. I mean, obviously somebody takes care of it because the grass is mowed,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's not a easily recognizable cemetery.
Right. The trustee probably knows about it because the trustee is responsible for keeping a mode. So yeah.
Yep. So there's a lot more to the story, so I don't want to go into too much because I don't want to
Right. Well,
spoil it for everyone. But there's been some other people have written articles about this about the grave, and things like that.
there was a pretty big deal with the grave robbing thing here in Fishers. So, and you got a monument put out for like a historic monument or whatever.
Yeah, so that's probably one of the other probably other than the Battle of Mudslide, that's probably one of the biggest events in Fisher's history. Was the grave robbing trials, and what that was is back then during that time period, people would rob graves, and but they were not robbing the graves mainly for valuables and things like that. Now they would take them, but the whole purpose of robbing graves back then was because of the medical schools. Medical schools needed cadavers uh, for dissection, and there was a shortage. And so the medical schools were actually complicit. They would actually pay people, and they were called ghouls, to dig up graves, dig up the bodies, bring them to the medical school, and then they would get a portion of that money. And the way that Fishers got wrapped up in it was there was a gang working in Indianapolis run by a guy named Rufus Cantrell, and they all had territories. So if you wanted to rob a grave in Indianapolis, you basically had to get permission from him. So up in Hamilton County, well, this area was run by a guy named Hampton West, and one day Rufus Cantrell asked Hampton West, could he come up and rob a body out of one of our cemeteries. The cemetery that we're talking about is the one off of Hoosier Road. It's the one that does the S curve. So it's got most of our founding members of our community buried there. So it is one of the our I'm going to assume it's our oldest cemetery. Um, but they asked to go rob a grave. So the gang gets there, they start digging the body up, and Hampton West, I guess either he got somebody else that would pay more, or he decided to renege on that offer. He shows up at the cemetery, and a gunfight ensues. It's the only time that I've been able to, through all my research, I have not found another instance where there was a grave robbing and then a gunfight took place in the cemetery and someone died. So that was a lot of stuff, and that all happened in at Highland Cemetery, which at the time though was called Beaver Cemetery.
Okay, yeah, I remember that. So now, and it's off Hoosier Road.
Yep. So it's right in that S curve. So
Yeah.
the grave that they were robbing was his name was Newton Bracken. Um, I don't know how many bodies are gone from that cemetery. I know that there's at least two, and that's just from historical records. Two bodies are no longer there. But how many bodies were stolen? I mean, I guarantee there's probably some graves out there that don't have a body in.
Yeah, it's that was a big thing at the time. I guess they came out of the Civil War, and the medical industry learned that how much they could learn from from doing all that surgery, so they needed the cadavers. So it became
Yeah.
huge business. So yeah, that was crazy.
And
Um,
then it also called, like, one of the things I started reading is it really led to people coming up with all different types of devices to protect the graves.
like the mortar safes, those steel things they put on
Yeah,
top.
steel
Yeah,
cage. I did some research. So back in I think the 50s, I can't remember what county it is, but they found a grave bomb, and it was like a big cylinder ball they would put in the grave, and I guess if you were to dig up the body, a shovel strike and it would blow up. They actually had to call the Indiana State Police in to make it safe, and now it's on display at one of the museums. But some people didn't have the money to buy things like that, so family members would stand guard and watch the body. And I've heard that the term graveyard shift, that's where that comes from.
yeah.
So
Well, it's like,
um,
next month on our Fishers chat, I've got someone from Benjamin Harrison's house, the museum downtown, because something most people don't know, Benjamin Harrison's father was grave robbed. They stole his body out of his grave, and it was such a prevalent thing at the time. They were trying to protect it, and I'm not going to go into the whole story. We'll do that next month.
yeah.
But the Harrison family poured concrete over the top, and whoever it was went down and around. They knew about it and went under the concrete
Oh,
and pulled out that way. So it was quite a problem at the time.
yeah. And so just knowing that it doesn't matter who you are, Benjamin Harrison's father. I mean, he became victim, so
Yeah.
it really did not matter. They went after anyone, and Hampton West, who's from Fishers, he was unscrupulous. I mean, this guy actually dug up the body of his own niece, so his brother's daughter, and he didn't care. It was all about money for him. So he dug up her, and then he would actually go to funerals, and he would attend these funerals, knowing that Goodwin is going to come back in the evening and steal the body.
Wasn't there a Fisher's doctor in your book somewhere that was involved in this, or?
Oh yeah, he was the mastermind behind the whole ordeal. So he basically he was like the prodigal son of Fishers, and he became the head of anatomy at one of the medical schools downtown, and he's the one that came up with the idea of paying cadavers or paying people to get cadavers, and he was put on trial for these grave robbings. However, he escaped it was a hung jury, and they never retried him, so he never had to stand trial for anything because of it. But he was very hated afterwards. Whenever he came back to Fishers, like a bunch of residents hid in the bushes. They took eggs and threw them at him. They just did not want him back in town because of what he had done. So, but what was very interesting about that whole ordeal, even though when we think about it, it is pretty sad that some of these people that were buried are no longer resting in peace because their bodies were disturbed. But and the reason why we got an historical marker for it is because that same year, the state government legislature they decided that we need to figure out a way to prevent this from happening in the future. So what did they do? They decided to create the state anatomical board, which is it's still in existence today. Today it's run by IU School of Medicine, and if you are a person that wants to donate your body to science, there is a form you will fill out, and there is a procedure in place for medical schools to get bodies for medical purposes. And the fact that something good came of all of these grave robbings, that's one reason why Fishers got their first historical marker.
Well, you were talking about the grave, the cemetery up there at 106th and Allisonville. You started talking about Hetty Hollow. That's what 126th and Allisonville.
Yes.
That's always been full of legends of one kind or another. So
Yeah,
it's always been haunted, supposedly. But
that's just because everybody, if you've been through that area, you know how that road dips. It dips down and you come right back up. And you know, that road leading to William Connor's farm, there was a lot of trading going on. So that's why that road was used a lot for people coming to William Connor. And because of that, people who were, looking to rob or make an easy buck, there was easy prey all along that road. So a lot of the legend of Heedy Hollow is a lot of the ghosts that you will see, or the noises, or any of that supernatural stuff. Is there? It could be the people that were killed along that road by robbers. But then there's
Highwaymen or
also
whatever.
this legend, and there's been no proof to disprove this, but that there was a schoolhouse right on that corner, and there was a schoolhouse that burned down, and like dozens of children perished in the fire. I have not been able to find any record of anything like that. But these are these stories that are told down and handed down through generations. So now they're saying that the ghosts in that area and why it's so spooky is it's the children that you know perished in that fire. So
Well,
yeah,
it's
there's
like
a lot of interesting stuff.
when you go back and you think about, it's kind of hard to get our heads wrapped around what it was like way back. For me, even in the '60s, my grandparents lived on 108th Street, my parents lived on 106th Street, and if I was with my grandparents, we were going somewhere. Allisonville Road, there was nothing. There, there was a restaurant on the corner,
Yeah,
that's now a CVS or whatever it is, but that was out there all by itself.
was that Ben Hur?
Well,
Ben Hur restaurant?
it went through different ones. It was a brick one for a long time. That was my granddad owned it for a while, but
Okay.
different people had it. But I remember as a little kid, I'd be driving, and I guess I didn't like the how dark it was, and so my grandparents would go, look for the green and white, because there'd be a Sinclair sign, at a Sinclair gas station somewhere, which I don't know where it was now, but it was like looking for light in the dark because it was so pitch black out there. There were no houses, there was
Yeah.
no oasis of light at night because it was out in the boonies, and that was in the '60s. So it's, can you imagine in the early 1900s or the late 1800s with your horses going down through there clopping? And then, that's one of the rumors I've heard about Hetty Hollow, is because it's that hollow, there'd be an echo for the horses. It sounds like there's others, whatever too.
And then a lot of times the horses would get spooked,
Yeah.
and so all of a sudden you're riding your horse, and horse just starts running off, and then so that just added to the mystery of Heedy Hollow. And then can you imagine like fog Um, you couldn't even see anything. It just adds to that, eerie spookiness.
And it was a
Um,
narrow road, and trees were overgrowing on. It was like all completely and covered with
yeah,
trees. Yeah,
yeah. That tree canopy over there. I mean, it is a great landscape like type road.
yeah.
Before it got enlarged. But you can just imagine picture back then. Pretty much that's the really the only road. Um, and yeah, and
Well, see those old guys like me. We always knew. Well, that was 37, and then when they put new 30, what well, we call new 37, which is over on on the other side, which now
yep.
becomes 69. We always called it new 37 and old 37. We never called it Allisonville until years later.
And I will say that was the hard part. I was so confused for so long
Mhm.
when I'm reading something and I'm like, okay, so it wasn't being called Allisonville. And then that's what threw me is the
Yeah,
37 because
yeah.
there was two different 37s and you really have to I had to do a lot of research to figure out, all right, what road are they talking about?
Just talk to some old guy, Yeah.
Yeah.
So it is. I mean, I grew up with it being old 37. I don't know when it changed the vernacular, but it was just kind of how it was.
Yeah.
So,
So hmm.
but it's changed just a tad through here. So, well, this is cool. What was one of the craziest things that you were most surprised by when you're doing your research?
um, well, I'll say, I mean, really, for me, it was the Eller Bridge arson was my really big surprise because it's just something that I felt like I had uncovered that I hadn't before. Um, but I would say the murder of Constable Frank Carey, just because as a retired police officer and honoring fallen officers has kind of been one of my passions. The murder of Frank Carey actually took place in Carmel. That's really the only story in the book that didn't take place in Fishers. Actually happened in Carmel. So Frank Carey is actually listed as the first law enforcement officer killed in the line of duty in Hamilton County. The reason why it's in the book is because Fishers, that's where the trial was held. It's almost like you're thinking about change of venue. Fishers was involved, so they came over, they did the inquest and everything like that. So, um, but the the murder of Frank Carey is actually very interesting because he was only a constable for one day.
Oh my goodness!
And actually, that wasn't even his full time job. His cousin was actually the constable for Clay Township, and they were actually going to arrest a pastor. I wouldn't say he's the type of pastor that if you didn't believe in what he said, he would assault you and things like that. He was not that nice of a preacher, but they were going to arrest him, and Frank Carey's cousin said, "Hey man, I need help. You want to help me?" It's almost like he was on his way home. He got deputized, went over the help, and he was shot and killed by the pastor during the arrest. So it's not
Oh
like
my
he had to
goodness!
train for this, but literally, I wouldn't even say he was a police officer a day. He was probably a police officer for a few hours, and then he lost his life. So there's a statue in Carmel. Um, there's a police officer, I think, on Main Street, and people say that that's I don't know, I guess kind of representative of Frank Carey. The murder took place not too far away from that
From that
from the
from that
location.
spot.
Yeah. So
Interesting. What
yeah.
about these bombings?
So the bombings actually, the building is still there. So the Tritipo family were a very prominent family in Fishers. Sam Tritipo was actually he lived in New Britain. That's when New Britain was its own separate town. And Sam Tritipo moved his merchant or his business. He moved it to Fishers, and that his building still stands today. So the building on 116th Street, I know with all the construction they got going on, but there is a brick building close to Handles,
Okay.
and that was his building. So he built that I think the year was night. I have to go back and look at the year. I want to say it's 1890 something. Um,
Those three buildings that are
yeah,
side
there's
by
three
side there.
buildings. Yeah, there's three buildings. Yeah. One of them was the Fishers National Bank.
Right.
His building is the one with the green awnings
Yeah.
outside. And they've renovated them inside. All right, but at least those buildings are still there. And that is really the one of the oldest buildings in the center of Fishers. We have some older buildings like the Kincaid House, but really that was outside of the original city boundaries of Fishers. Um, but there was a lot of people that hated the Tritopos for whatever reason, and they were the victims of two series of bombings. Um, One of them, they bombed their farm. So when they went out to the horse stables, somebody had devised a bomb so that when you opened up the door, it would detonate, sending shrapnel, killing the person opening the door. What saved what saved them was that it was snowy that day, and so there was a snow bank or snow pile had built up in front of the door, so they had a hard time opening the door. So they were not standing directly in front of it, and when so the bomb went off, they were still injured, but nobody was killed. Um, and then there was a second attempt, and this was just pure luck. But there was a package that was delivered, and when the package was delivered, it said "open other end." Well, they didn't see that, or it said "open this end." So he didn't see that. So he opened up the other end of the box, and once he opened it up and looked inside, he saw that it was a makeshift bomb, and it had been mailed from Cincinnati, and it was just him. It was just fortunate for him that he opened it from the wrong end. Because if he had opened it up from the correct end where it said "open this end," it would have
Would have
blown right.
detonated it.
Yeah, and the way it was set up was when you opened up the box, there was some sandpaper, and it was supposed to rub across a stack of matches, which would then ignite, and then ignite some black powder with shrapnel, and then that's how it would blow up. So, but
Oh,
anyway,
Fishers has had its little history here.
yeah.
You got a
So,
pharmacist that was selling. Was he selling out the back door too, or what was the story on this thing?
oh, he was actually selling. This pharmacist was selling alcohol.
Ah, probably during the
Um,
Prohibition.
yes. So, well, not even during Prohibition, you had to have a license to serve or to sell alcohol. You had to have a prescription, and basically, what he was doing was um, selling it basically illegally. And so, this was where you get into what they call the blind tigers and all the rules. And it's kind of weird back then. You could get a doctor's prescription for whiskey, and the way he got caught was there were some kids they got wrapped up in some mischief, and they were like, where did you get the alcohol? And then come to find out, they said they got it from the local pharmacist, and so he was providing liquor to anybody, and you didn't need it. He was selling it without a prescription, so you would just go around the back, and he was selling it. So
Yeah.
yeah.
That right? That was in Fishers then, huh?
Yeah, that was downtown Fishers. Yep.
So our bank got robbed.
And the bank got robbed. So that white building that's on 116th, that was um, the Fisher or the build. I'm sorry, the building next to Sam Tritipo's building.
Right.
That was the Fisher National Bank. And during the renovations of that building, the safe that was in that building has now been taken out. But that safe has been there since that building was.
I opened my very first bank account there. At that time, it was the American National Bank.
Yep.
And I remember at 6 years old to the big teller cage and all that kind of stuff. It was, old school.
Yeah. So it's actually robbed a couple times, and the last time it was robbed, that was the demise of the bank. Because one thing that people don't know about back then, unlike today, your money's insured. So if the bank's robbed or they go bankrupt for some reason, as long as it's up, well, I think they increased it. I think if it's below $250,000.
Used to be 250. If they've increased, I don't know where it is, but yeah,
Okay. So you get all your money back. All
yeah.
right. It's but back then your money was not insured. And it was a big deal. Like banks would advertise, "Oh, we got the best safe in the world. We've got the best alarm system, whatever," because they wanted you to deposit their money with them. But when the bank got robbed, they really needed to go after it and try to recover as much money as they could. And the last time it was robbed was right during the Great Depression,
Yeah.
and they never recovered, and the bank closed up.
So there's several other stories in there. There's some. It's a good book. It's a fun read, so I recommend it. How would someone get it?
They can get it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books a Million, Target, pretty much any retailer. If you just did a search for Wicked Fishers, the book will pop up.
And you have a new one coming out next month.
Yes, October 29th. This book is called Frontier Justice. It talks about it's the evolution of well, it talks about all the different vigilante groups in the state of Indiana, and it also talks about the evolution of law enforcement because they're kind of intertwined. Um, you got some vigilante groups that are bad. You got some that have noble intentions, and then and vigilante groups began as a response to a lack of law enforcement. I mean, back in the Wild Wild West, you had like one person as
Yeah.
the marshal, and so you didn't really have police departments like we have today, and hundreds of officers working in one big city. So citizens had to band together to protect themselves, and this book kind of explores all those different groups.
So what's the name of it?
It's called Frontier Justice.
Okay, and that comes out when?
Well, it's called Hoosier Vigilantes. But
Okay,
it's called Frontier Justice. Yeah,
and it comes out when?
it comes out October 29th.
Okay, all right, right before Halloween. So
Right for Halloween. I think they intentionally did that.
okay, well, very good. Well, that's excellent. Well, thank you so much for sharing all these stories with us. People definitely want to get that book. Both of them actually. I'm looking forward to the new one. But and also, you just wrote a guest article for Fisher's Magazine too, didn't you? This that just came out.
Yes. So I've started to write monthly articles for the Fishers Magazine as a kind of a contributing author. I'll have another article coming out in October that's going to focus on the history of Halloween and some of the customs and traditions that we still celebrate today, but also some of the ways in which residents of Hamilton County celebrated Halloween way back in the late 1800s.
Well, Robert, thank you so much for sharing with us. This was great, a lot of fun. This video will be on Fisher's. You can always go into our Fisher Facebook page, Fisher's Historical Society Facebook page, and all these videos are on there. And we now have a Fisher's Historical Society YouTube page, which this stuff will be on as well. So thanks for coming and sharing with us. This was great, and looking forward to doing some more. All right, see you later. Take care.
Take care.